All of us have our patterns of behavior that work so well for us until they don't. One of the questions that I would often ask my personal training clients when I was going into homes back in the day is, what has led you to the place that you're at today? How did you come to call me? Why do you want to shift or change? And so often what I would see is that years before they called me, a pattern started to develop. And oftentimes that pattern was something that they developed to keep themselves safe, to soothe themselves. Often I would see it in the realm of how they ate, right? Their relationship with food. Sometimes I would see it in the realm of their exercise or other addictions as well. But there was always this moment when what they were doing no longer served them. What they were doing to cope, to make themselves feel better in the moment, was now getting in the way of the life that they wanted. And I think this happens with all of us at some point, right? We develop coping mechanisms to help us feel better in the moment, to help us feel safe. And then suddenly they no longer work, or they disrupt our life in a way that we need and want to change them. Today, that's what we're talking about. And if this resonates with you, then I invite you to listen along as I invite my special guest and our Move Daily nutrition coach, Kim Hogarth, to the podcast. Kim, welcome to the podcast today.
Thank you. Hi, Tracy. It's lovely to be back again to be on the podcast today.
So we're talking about our stories in life that have gotten us to the place that we're at. So often the elements of our past, the things that have happened to us in our background, in our life growing up, those things write on the slate of who we are today. And they dramatically at times can impact our behavior, our choices, the things that we do. And I was just saying earlier to the audience there in the intro that those things can impact us in a way that are useful for a time, or we think that they're useful for a time. And then it just, slowly can make our lives feel like they are wreaking havoc. So our coping mechanisms can work for a bit, and then they fall apart and don't work. And I know that this is partly your story. And that's why we wanted to have you on today. We wanted to talk about what that was like for you. We'd love to hear a little bit of your background, of your life growing up, and how you developed specific coping mechanisms that worked for a season and then totally did not work, and you had to make some drastic changes. So let's dive into your life.
Lovely. Thank you, Tracy. And yeah, I think it's now I'm at a point a little bit more of resolution with a lot of what I've been through in the last 18 months. I wanted to come on to share it because there are so many lessons I think I've learned that I think will be relevant to our audience, not so much of what I went through as a child, but more so what I've experienced in the last couple of years with my exercise and my nutrition and everything. But yeah, essentially, I had a highly traumatic childhood, included an alcoholic mother, several divorces and marriages, and various periods of verbal abuse and other issues that resulted in me having many issues as I was growing up. And it's interesting because, as you have said, I've discovered with my therapy that actually many of the skills I've developed as an adult actually do serve me really well. Like in a crisis, I'm brilliant. I'm highly organized. I'm very good at compartmentalizing my emotions. So there's lots of good things, but also what I observed over the last couple of years is my coping mechanism really began to manifest itself in exercise. And
Mm.
consequently, I know many of our wonderful movers know that it resulted in me exercising excessively every single day. So I never really stopped, apart from the one time I had knee surgery. And even so, I still did walking on the spot. So you can see it was more of a driven addiction than anything else. And I've now kind of come through and out the other side of that. But it was so interesting now to reflect upon that and what it did to my body, what it did to my mind, what it did to my weight and my fatigue and everything else. And I think that's been a really interesting part of the journey. But yeah, just to touch on your original point, is that we all have these coping mechanisms we develop, and there is a real fine line between those being successful and those being really destructive. And I think I passed well into the destructive space, and I think that's really worth kind of talking about to share with others who might be in the same situation.
It's funny, these things, they kind of slowly evolve over time, right? We don't instantly go from, nothing to everything. It's just kind of like a slow evolution over time. And then suddenly we realize that this is just something that is not serving us. So, uh, what was it about exercise, I suppose, and that focus on what you were eating? What was it about that that soothed you or that brought you some sort of comfort or some sort of relief from the angst of your childhood?
Yeah, absolutely. So really, for me, as I understand now, it was twofold. So there was the control around eating. So when I was younger, my mother, due to her conditions, basically meant that I was cooking all my own food and I was overeating because food was a comfort to me. So I spent a lot of my childhood very overweight and in a very negative place of my body. So when I lost weight as an adult, I then continued to exert that control over food quite extremely so. So there was that element of it, which gave me the control that I didn't have as a child. And then with regards to the exercise, I discovered because I am predominantly an only child, I do have a family now that I've discovered since, but predominantly I grew up by myself. And actually, my safe space was to be by myself because it was isolating myself from the people around me who were, in effect, doing me harm as a child, for a better word, certainly mental harm. And so with exercise, I had to do it by myself. And I
Mhm.
could listen to obviously the instruction, of you. I could have my podcast on if I just wanted to follow along. I did a lot of jogging on the spot. I did that for hours every single day because it allowed me to zone out and literally protect my space.
Mm.
And the irony is that as you kind of already have alluded to, is that this began to become more and more and more as I realized I wasn't coping with things like menopause. I wasn't coping with other things that were going on in my life very well at all. And that's where I think you begin to see that tipping point of it moving from being what could be seen as a relatively healthy activity actually into something that really began to drive me into the ground. But we are amazing at justifying that. And I was the queen of justifying my exercise. Even you tried to help me, my family, my husband, my best friend, everybody tried to kind of very gently tell me, is this not a little bit too much? But I would come up with reasons to why I had to keep going. And I think that is when the alarm bells should begin to ring for people who are in a similar situation. If those around you who care about you and love you are beginning to notice your behavior, whatever that may be, I think that's a great point for you to begin to just look at yourself and work out, okay, is this actually something healthy that I'm doing to myself?
So, what were those reasons that you came up with to continue?
Yeah, so by and large, I would make excuses. So I would manage to spin it into something positive, like, well, I've had a stressful day, so now I'm going to go and work out a bit more, or I've got this goal. I would invent things that really, considering I was already quite lean, were not goals that I should have had in a healthy space. But I was always finding some reason to attach my behavior to it.
Mm.
And in the end, I would literally say to people, that's how I cope. I'm in menopause. I have a very busy but very lovely work life. I've got 3 young children. There's so much going on. This is how I am surviving. And to some degrees, that was absolutely true. It was how I was surviving. But what I didn't do was stop to kind of address why I was in that spot and actually what could I do to not be in that spot that would be more healthy, more productive. And in the end, that's what I did. I took your advice. I sought therapy. My husband also was really encouraging in that vein. I began to listen to the people around me more, but it was so interesting because the one thing that really made me sad was that we were on holiday with my folks and they were in the kind of lodgings next to where we were. And my dad said to me, he said, "Oh, I saw you like exercising," and it was some stupid hour. And he was so concerned in that moment because obviously normally I don't see them every day. They wouldn't see me working out so much. And I just felt so ashamed, not
Mhm.
because he had mentioned it, but more because it was like someone who, I mean, he is so dear to me, means the world to me. And it's my stepdad who's been with me throughout my childhood. Him and my stepmom are the two constants. But for him to come to me and for me to see that look on his face of concern and worry for me, it
Mm.
was like the metaphorical slap in the face. I needed to go,
Mm.
I'm in trouble. Someone I really care about has seen me, has seen this. I
Mm.
need to do something. And that just I couldn't compartmentalize that away. It was
Yeah.
with me now and I was like, right. And over time I really realized I had to do something. And sometimes it takes that something out of nowhere that just jogs you and is like, it's a bit of a wake up call, I guess. But yeah, that was really quite startling, I think.
I felt that shame for you as you just shared that moment of being seen in our brokenness almost. And I felt sad when you shared that part too. So I can imagine that it was very hard for you to have that moment.
Yeah, it was genuinely, I think also, I mean, as you know me very well, and a lot of our audience do, is that I'm someone who copes. And actually that is something I did get from our childhood, is that I'm very good at coping. I can get on despite whatever else is happening. And I think that there's this vision that you're always putting on this front, you're hiding everything so well. And I know a lot of our, the women in our membership and similar have that, we have this, we can do it all, we can deliver everything. We are the women who do everything. And for someone to see through that, I think makes you feel really, really vulnerable and
Yeah.
exposed. And it's really hard then to almost feel like you're not coping, but we're not allowed to admit we're not coping in modern life. We're supposed to just be able to do it all and be smiling and happy and all the other kind of stuff. And for that to be so called out by someone I really cared about was, yeah, it really was shameful. And
Mm.
the interesting thing as well, I guess, is that, and I know you very much feel this too, is that in our industry, exercising more is glorified. It's seen as commitment
Yeah.
and dedication and like,
Yeah.
wow, you're amazing. And I would get people, I'd say that to you, and they'd be
Sure.
like, I exercise 4 hours a day, and they'd be like, wow, that's brilliant. And then back of my mind going, no, it's really not brilliant. How
Yeah.
come you think that's good? And that
Right.
was partly again why I wanted to, to share a little bit about what I've been going through, because so many women think more is more when it comes to exercise, but it's just not. And ironically, I was gaining weight, which I'll explain, but I wasn't even getting leaner through doing that much exercise. And I was miserable in the end. So I think it's such an interesting dichotomy of that. I think it's seen as being amazing, but actually it's just not.
Yeah, it really is. You're right. Our society would prize that, right? So the confusion probably within yourself, right? Or the justification within yourself, as you already alluded to, that you think, oh, I'm doing the right thing, but you knew deep down what you were doing it for, right? And just to have that sense of control. Um, so that breaking point sort of happens and your stepdad sees you. What what did you do from there? What was the next steps for you? Because that sounds like that was the moment of realization that something needed to shift, but it's hard. We're in those patterns of behavior that serve us so well to keep us safe and to keep us feeling, secure. And now you have to disrupt that. So what did the next step look like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And it did take me still some weeks and months after that event to really begin to kind of like consider what to do. And it was so interesting, because I began to change everything but that. So basically, I started going to yoga and I started trying to journal. I started trying to do all these things around it without actually
Mm.
changing it. I was just thinking, well, if I'm stressed and tired, I'll do something to like fix my stress and tiredness.
Mhm.
And it was
You
interesting because I
weren't
came
you
back
weren't
from,
ready. It sounds like
no,
you
exactly. I was so
weren't
not
ready.
ready. And also, I didn't really know what to do. I think that's another thing, is that this was working for me mentally, even though physically it wasn't. And I'm like, this is fine. I can just do this forever. I don't need to change anything. But I knew I did. But still, like it's okay. You're doing something and it's fine. And I came back from yoga class one day and I was talking to my husband and I just said to him, I was like, well, it's okay. I don't love it. It's a bit, so what I'm like. I like the lifting. I like, yoga's a bit more, all respect to people who do it, but it's just not for me. And my husband he looked at me and he goes, you're dancing around the problem. Go and get therapy.
Mm.
He's like, you need to go and sort it out. And I just looked at him and I was like, I can't do that. And he said, no, you have to,
Mhm.
because basically you're skirting around everything without
Mhm.
addressing what really is the problem.
Mhm.
And he was spot on, because I've always hidden from my childhood. I've known it was going to be the hardest thing I ever did to address it and go back
Sure.
mentally.
Yeah.
And I've run away from it always. And I was like, right, no, you're right. And before I could really overthink it, I came to my laptop and I found a therapist and I called her like then
Mm.
and there. And I started my journey with therapy, which was sort of 4 or 5 months. And I'm now kind of like, I've concluded that for now. I think I'll return to it. But, and again, I think it's really interesting how the people close to you see you, but
Mm.
you have to be open to listening to them, even if you don't want to. And I think he was seeing exactly what I was doing. I was too scared to try and go for what actually was really going to help me. And then understand, by doing that and understanding why I was exercising so much, you then begin to unpick it all and you can actually undo it, which is the place I'm in now. And I no longer work out 4 hours a day. But it took understanding the root cause of that driver for me
Yeah.
to be able to do that. And I think so many of us gloss over it and we try to just fix it in a different way. And
Yeah.
it takes courage, I think, to really go back and try and understand.
It does take courage. As you were telling that story there, I was just thinking about Quentin, who did the Ironman about 15 years ago now, and he had never competed in any race at all. And the Ironman, which is a crazy race of swimming, biking, and running, that was his first one in his life. And he had the biking and the running dialed in, but boy, did he avoid the swimming. It was his least favorite thing. He talked about training for swimming a lot, right? So he would talk about what he was going to do and how he was going to do it. And he talked about the wetsuit that he was going to buy. And literally, I think he started training for the swimming element of the race just a few months before. Like, not recommended at all when you're doing an Ironman. He did finish the race, incidentally, but it just reminded me of the things that are hard, that are uncomfortable, that we don't want to face. And we talk about them and we have these conversations about them. We think about them, we journal about them, we try to avoid them, but so often we just don't do them because it is so uncomfortable and it is so challenging. And we have to face these parts of ourselves, now looking at your story, that are frightful, right? And full of angst and memory, and you're bringing back stuff that you don't want to deal with. And yet there was no way that you were going to finish this race unless you did that, right? There was no
Exactly.
way. And so you faced something that was so hard to face, and now on the other side you can look back and say, it was hard, it was challenging, I didn't want to do it, but I did it, and look at the results now.
Absolutely. And obviously, I learned a huge amount about myself in that process. And one of the things that has been a complete joy and a blessing out of that process is that I now feel justified in some of my own personal choices and behavior. It's like, I know that I can speak for many of us that there's many parts of our personalities we don't like or we're ashamed of, or we just don't love about ourselves. I always thought there was a lot about me that was just not very nice. Like I would do certain things that would be driven, and I'd be like, well, I don't, social situations is a great example for me. I don't like people necessarily coming over to the house. I don't necessarily like being out amongst people. And I always thought I was just really unsociable, and I didn't like myself for that because people
Mm.
don't like people who don't want to be with others. But again, I came to discover that, of course, whereas my bedroom at home, when I was growing up, was my safe space, I've now transferred the safe space to my whole house. So people coming into that for me is really uncomfortable. No matter how much I love them or care about them, it's just ingrained in me.
Mm.
And behaviors like that I've realized actually I can totally own that because it's not my fault. And the relief you have knowing that something that you don't love about yourself is not just because you're a unkind or unnice or unsociable person. It's because that's what's happened to you as part of when you were growing up. And I think there's a great relief and a great comfort in that. And that's another thing I think when we're trying to go back and face something that is exceptionally difficult, is to realize that it's not just about unpacking it all and having it out there. And actually, that's what I'm dealing with really now, is processing all of this that I've kind of
Yeah.
unpacked and got out of Pandora's box. Is that there are the understanding that comes with that process is priceless, because you
Mm.
realize actually so much is not your fault, and it's okay to feel the way you feel and to do the things you do. And also, by knowing this, you can begin to make changes if that's what you want to do. And I've been doing that in certain areas, and I feel good knowing that I can do that now. But that, just knowing that you're not to blame often for who you are and how you are, is wonderful. And I don't think that negates the need for us to work on ourselves and to make positive change. It's not an excuse, but it's a comfort to know that that's where it's come from. And I think that was invaluable. And again, I think it's another positive way to look at some of these ways of reflecting when they are so scary, is that you will gain out of it understanding that is, you never had before.
So you've made this shift now into a different approach to your nutrition and to your exercise. Can you talk about what that's been like for you and how you have shifted?
Yeah, of course. And that is actually, again, was one of the reasons why I wanted to share this, because I know everybody's journey is individual, but actually a lot of the body-based learnings that I've got, I think, are really relevant to many of the women out there. So just to go back to when I was exercising 3 to 4 hours a day, I was obviously burning a massive amount of calories. And I wasn't eating that much, I thought. There's always this thing about, eat less, move more, you're going to lose body fat. But I wasn't getting any thinner. Not that that was my goal. It wasn't about that. But obviously, being in the field we're in, you're observing your body and watching what's going on. And what I realized as I kind of moved through that is that I wasn't, because I was under eating so much that I would end up binge eating. Now, this is not binge eating in the sense of uncontrollable eating, but I was massively overeating at weekends. And consequently, where I was eating fairly healthily during the week, I hugely offset that on the weekends. And so actually, in a very small sense, I was gaining weight over the course of that sort of 18 to 20 months or so.
Mhm.
And what is really interesting about that is that, as a trap that I know many of our members fall into, is that they think they're eating, under their calories, but then they actually realize on certain days, on certain occasions, on weekends, they basically just erode all of that quote unquote good work that they might have already done. And also with regards to expenditure, the fact that I was burning so many calories meant I was so hungry. My hunger hormones were all over the
Sure.
place. My sleep was all over the place. My body was so tired that I felt that driver to eat, to consume calories. And that was biological. And I think when you get into that space of really going, I'm just going to go for a run to burn this off, or I'm just going to do this, to you become in this perpetual cycle of actually starving your body, and your body's going to in effect make you eat more calories. And again, you're not going to really get anywhere, and it's a terrible place to be stuck. So now moving forward, whereby I'm exercising 1 to 1.5 hours a day, which for me is a revolution. It's still a lot, but my body's very accustomed to exercising, so for me that's okay. And because of that, and over a period of, I'd say, about 3 months of doing that, my hunger is regulated so much that I'm able to eat well every day. I actually lost 3 or 4 pounds, and I'm pretty lean already. It wasn't intentional. But because I was able to normalize my exercise, I was able to normalize my food. And that, I think, is the key message that I would love our audience to hear today, is that it doesn't take extremes to have successful fat loss or to be able to reach your goals. Actually, the extremes often will stand in your way. And I think so much of our pre-programming lenses to this, as I say, eat less, move more is going to get you to the results. That was all, the 80s and the 90s was all about this. But the more we see in the modern world is that's not the case. And it's not necessary to punish ourselves in this way with food or with exercise to be able to achieve what we want to achieve. And now I'm sleeping better. My fatigue is much, much reduced. I'm able to eat comfortably and not be so hungry that I just want to keep going. I don't binge eat anymore at weekends. And I'm just so much happier, but yet I'm working out way less. So I'm like a example of where actually a sensible, safe, normal approach is more than enough for everybody to have success.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think asking ourselves the question, if you're listening, you're finding yourself maybe in the same scenario that Kim has been in, asking yourself, what is my reason for doing this? What's the driver, right? What's the driver behind me focusing on food or focusing on fitness, and to the extreme on either end there? And just really getting curious. I think that's what you did. You had a point where you're like, okay, what's going on inside? Because it's not just for good health and longevity that I'm moving forward here. It's really to control something else. So I really appreciate that you shared your story with us, because I think a lot of people are in the same boat where they're being driven by something other than health and wellness.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as women, when we get to the season in our life as well, there is so much going on. And it's almost like you accumulate emotional baggage and trauma and life events as we get older and older and older. And many of us find ways to cope with that. And quite often, as women, as I say, we're pre-programmed, or there's the expectation that we're going to be able to do it all. And we put in these coping mechanisms to allow us to do that. But you do get to the point whereby it's just not serving you. And I
Yeah.
think I know recently in the membership, we talked about, you know, exactly what you're saying about actually don't ask why once, ask why 3 times. So in other words, For example, why do I eat more at weekends? Okay, because I enjoy food. That's not really going to tell us very much. Why do you enjoy food? Well, because in the week I don't eat very much and I'm just really excited for the weekend. Okay, but then third why do you not eat much in the week? Well, because I'm trying to make up for the weekend. Immediately now you can
Yes.
see what's actually causing that.
Yeah.
And so I think that what you were saying about drilling down about that self-reflection is really vital. And also the thing to remember is that you can do that in a supportive environment with others. You can come,
Mm.
like in our membership, we have a great environment. But if you just want to get a pen and a bit of paper and sit and do that yourself, because having been in a place of feeling true shame in more ways than I can ever explain, actually just keeping it to yourself to make a start is really invaluable, because you're more likely to do it if you know no one else is going to see it until you're ready. But take a pen and a bit of paper, sit down and go through the three whys and try and understand where this is coming from. And then you own that. That's nothing to do with anybody else. But beginning to understand that can then lead you to go, okay, maybe I do need some support. Maybe I do need counseling. Maybe I do need a friend. Maybe I need a coach, whatever that may be. You can then be ready to take that next step. But that first self reflection, just do it by yourself if that's what makes you feel comfortable. It's a great way to start.
Mm. That's that's a great strategy. I like that. Kim, for those listening today, and maybe they're again resonating with some of the things that you have said, what would be one piece of advice that you would give to the listener who is afraid to open up Pandora's box?
Absolutely. So I think one huge lesson that I've kind of learned out of this is that there is always a different way to cope with something. I think I was so stuck on exercise being the only way I could survive, literally the only way. Like, I would not even want my children to be in the room. I would, it was so extreme for me because that was the only thing I thought I could do to keep going.
Mm.
Now, I never really realized or grasped that there was an alternative to that. And I think that for anybody out there who's in a similar situation, using these coping mechanisms in an unhealthy way, I'd just say there is always a different way to do it, even if we can't see it. It's just finding that different way and try to be open to that, because you've got nothing to lose. You can always keep doing what you're doing if that's your choice, but be open to just knowing there's bound to be a better way to help
Mm.
yourself. It's just being open to exploring that, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And if you're listening and you're thinking about just exploring these parts of you, we invite you to, message us, have these conversations with your friends. There are a lot of private, public groups that, of women going through these things that talk about issues like this. I know over in our Move Daily Hustle Facebook group, it's a very encouraging group that gives such great advice. If a woman is struggling, she'll post something in the group. What would you do in this situation? And everyone chimes in with such positive feedback. But sometimes it does take that deeper dive, that deeper look. And of course, therapy. I've been in it for years myself, and Kim has been in it. I think it's so useful to have someone that is that third party that has an unbiased opinion that we can bounce things off of, and they can give us that feedback. It's so useful. It's been super helpful in my life, and I know in yours as well. So don't be afraid to check that out. I know it's expensive. Sometimes it's that commitment to health that we want to look at, but there are a lot of free online resources as well. Lots of people on YouTube and in Instagram, therapists, the psychologists who are posting super helpful content as well. So I would encourage people to, begin to just listen to that stuff or read books, right? There's so much literature out there as well on this topic. So I will post some of that. I've got a whole reading list of books that have helped me journey through these things. So I'll definitely post that in the show notes below. So take a look there. Kim, thanks so much for your vulnerability and openness today, because it's stories like this that can help us recognize maybe some of those things in ourselves and be brave enough to move forward. So thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Tracy. And yeah, anybody who wants to reach out to any of us, please feel free to do so. And also, you can post anonymously in our Move Daily Hustle Facebook group as well. So you don't have to reveal your name or anything if you don't wish to. But no, it's a pleasure, as always, to be here with you.
Thank you, folks, for listening today. And as always, go move daily in your fitness, wellness, and nutrition. And we'll see you all in the next Move Daily Talks.